In 1938, there was a gentleman named Harold Burris Meyer, and he was a theatrical designer and a sound engineer. And he began developing techniques that would control the emotional response of audiences and to create mass hysteria. And so from there, you have this Rockefeller-Rothschild alliance. What they were doing is not only were they looking at ways to steer the masses, but they wanted to change the standard tuning of A to 440 hertz. So in 1939, they began funding Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi propagandist. And at that time, Joseph Goebbels, he wanted to change the standard tuning of A. And so he organized a meeting in London to do that. And they didn't invite any of the French musicians because they were opposed to 440 hertz. And then the organizers of the conference, they interviewed musicians, the instrument makers, the physicists, and then also the sound engineers. And if any of those people were against 440 hertz, then they weren't invited to the conference. So it was all controlled. And as a result, it's not surprising that the standard tuning of A was changed to 440 hertz. And that happened June 1939, just months before World War II broke out. And the timing of that is no coincidence because 440 hertz is a destructive frequency, and that it can retrain our thoughts towards disharmony, disruption, and disunity.
This is why you don't ever want to touch the receipts on thermal paper. These thermal paper receipts contain BPA and BPS. So these are endocrine disrupting chemicals that can actually be absorbed through your skin. So just touching one at a grocery store every once in a while isn't the end of the world, but I would like to avoid as many endocrine disruptors in my life, thank you, as I can. So I either don't get the receipt, or I'm just gonna use my handy dandy wool shirt here to put the receipt in the trash and not touch it. So if you are touching a lot of receipts or in your daily life, don't touch the thermal paper receipts, and you will decrease your exposure to BPA and BPS, endocrine disrupting chemicals that can be messing up your hormones. Don't touch them.
If you're still eating oatmeal for breakfast, you need to check this out. There's a new study by the Environmental Working Group, and it shows over 92% of oat-based foods tested positive for a pesticide called chlormequat. Over 80% of Americans have traces of this pesticide in their blood. It's been linked to delayed puberty, reduced fertility, and slowed fetal growth in babies, and it's in most oat-based products on the market.
I want you to know, I'm at work, but I went to McDonald's, right? Went to McDonald's, and I wanted to get a sausage McGriddle and a large orange juice. I don't ever eat McDonald's because it messes with my stomach. Heard the rumors, but I was like, you know what? I need something cheap, something quick. I gotta go into work. So I'm eating, right? This is as far as I got. A couple bites. And I feel something in my mouth. And I'm thinking, oh fuck, did I chip my tooth? So I'm feeling around. Nope, not me. What's this? It's a fucking tooth. That's a goddamn tooth in my food. And like I said, I already checked my mouth. It's not me. Like, it's hard. It's sharp. I know I don't have any gloves on or anything. I don't have gloves, but that's a whole fucking tooth. Hold on. Tell me I'm tripping.
I killed 800 children. I was medically experimenting on children compared to Adolf Hitler, assumed to be part of the KKK. It's kind of like where to begin, you know? What is feeling called by God? What is that like? Baby John! I just started to see malnutrition everywhere. So many children came seeking help. We decided to make a malnutrition rehab center.
She would do things as if she was a medical personnel.
She was not qualified to do this.
They were not licensed as a medical center.
DIY? Is that what you call it?
This was over my head as a nurse.
Oh my God.
So we went to the U.S. Embassy.
Charges that he brought against Renee.
So many wild accusations.
We need to talk about the white savior complex.
I do believe we saved lives, hundreds and hundreds of them.
Renee is being put up as an angel.
People back in America think she's awesome. They're giving her money.
Angels like Renee bring death on the continent.
We were about 5 miles down the road where there were some Vietnamese children at the gateway of the village, and they gave the old finger gesture at us. It was understandable that they picked us up from the GIs there. They stopped the truck. They didn't stop the truck. They slowed down a little bit, and it was just like response. The guys got up, including the lieutenants, and just blew all the kids away. There was about 5 or 6 kids blown away there, and then the truck just moved, continued down the hill. That was my first day in Vietnam.
Did you know a group of Southern white women rewrote your history books to make slavery look not that bad? Let's get into it. And before you go on my comments getting upset, these are not my personal opinions. These are facts. You can research them for yourselves before you go crashing out in my comments. They're called the Daughters of the Confederacy. They were founded in 1894, and no, they weren't just sipping sweet tea and reminiscing on their granddaddies. That's not what they were doing at all. These women launched an entire propaganda campaign. They lobbied schools to rewrite textbooks that made slavery to be benevolent, claiming that the Civil War wasn't about race, but it was about states' rights. And those Confederate statues that we all know? The Daughters of the Confederacy are responsible for putting up about 700 of them. And surprisingly, or not, depending on how you look at it, these statues weren't put up during the Civil War. They were put up during the Jim Crow era. Intimidation disguised as heritage, right? They even helped shape movies like Gone with the Wind. That's why so many people think the South is all manners and magnolias instead of whips and chains. So the next time someone tells you Confederate statues are about heritage, ask them heritage of what exactly?
Now I watched my wife work all day getting 30 bags together for you ungrateful sons of bitches, and all I can hear is criticize, criticize, criticize. From now on, don't ask me or mine for nothing.
But in all seriousness, the women of the KKK were putting in work. The first iteration of the KKK in the 1800s, the wives, they were home, they were being mothers, they were upholding white supremacy and raising their children to believe the same things. And it was at this time that they were also being used as objects to show the black men what they couldn't have and what they were unworthy of. In the 1900s, things changed. In the 1920s, we saw the creation of an auxiliary group, the WKKK, the Women of the Ku Klux Klan. And they rolled deep. The WKKK's membership peaked in 1923 at approximately 250,000 members in 36 states. And just like the KKK, they only really dissolved because of the Great Depression.
Black women were there, fighting for the vote, speaking, organizing, marching. But when it came time to claim victory, white suffragists cut them out. Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman speech was ignored. Frances Harper warned that white women prioritized race over sisterhood, and black women were often asked to march at the back of parades. The suffrage movement split over race. White women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony opposed black men voting before white women, and built alliances with racist politicians to get ahead. The 15th Amendment faced backlash, and some white feminists turned their back on black rights. Many black women were deliberately excluded from national conventions, and Jim Crow laws were ignored by mainstream suffrage groups. But black women didn't wait to be included. From the National Association of Colored Women to voter education leagues in the South, they knew if they don't fight for everyone's rights, no one will be safe. When the 19th Amendment passed, white women voted and black women were blocked, beaten, taxed, and denied at polls. It took another 45 years, a civil rights movement, and the Voting Rights Act for their voices to count. It wasn't until 1965 that real access began, decades after suffrage. They were erased, ignored, and betrayed, but they never stopped. Black women weren't just part of the movement, they were the backbone of it, and they're still fighting to protect what they never got to fully claim.
In the 1960s, the Black Liberation Movement was the number 1 target of COINTELPRO. And the Black Panther Party specifically was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, and the CIA, and all of the repressive forces in the United States government. And so I was one of those young people who was targeted by COINTELPRO because I was an activist, because I was opposed to the United States government's policies, because I was opposed to racism. And so I ultimately had to go underground. I was ultimately captured based on being charged with false charges. I was captured. I was shot with my hands in the air. I was shot in the back. I was tortured, beaten. I was spent 2 years in solitary confinement in men's prisons because of my political beliefs. I was spent 6.5 years in prison in the United States, and what I learned about prison in the United States, that it's a new form of plantation.
Has what?
Cracker Barrel has a code word for black people when they come in. It's like, the way we do it is we say coup. Over the radio, we tell the basically the back staff that there's black people here.
Wait, is this fair or foul?
Book, 7th, 8th grade, high school, you will read or see nothing about what you have talked about here this morning.
Well, perhaps that's what the reality is for in your neighborhood. I grew up in Oak Cliff, Texas, and I was taught by black women who taught me my history. So I think there are many people, you talk about hard research, black people have been doing hard research on this question for a long time. George Washington Williams wrote a history of the Negro people in America in 1882. W.B. Du Bois was writing in the early 20th century. So I think the reality in this conversation reminds me, black people fighting white supremacy in this country is a bit like Don Quixote tilting at windmills. I mean, we've thrown generation after generation after generation of brilliant black people at trying to get white people to understand the truth of their society. I have no interest in throwing more black genius at this question. So I think if you want your children to know the history of America, you should read the historians, whether it's Dr. Kendi, you should read Evelyn Higginbotham, you should read Henry Louis Gates, you should read W.B. Du Bois, you should read, I could send you we should post on the show a whole list of black historians who have taught the history of this country, and perhaps some white ones as well. David Blight just won the Pulitzer Prize for his history, and he's a white man trying to get people to see the history of the country.
The solution is not to take Africans and move them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it and allow these people to live off what they have. This is called the CFA franc, a colonial currency that France prints for 14 African nations, and by virtue of which it exploits the resources of this nation. This is a child working in a gold mine in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is one of the poorest nations in the world. For Burkina Faso, which has gold, France prints colonial currency. In return, it demands that 50% of everything Burkina Faso exports ends up in the coffers of the French treasury. The gold that this child crawls into a tunnel to extract mostly ends up in the coffers of the French state.
In addition to my work leading the Israel public policy team, I created a new role specifically focused on the Jewish diaspora. It is a privilege to represent Meta to Jewish communities worldwide. I am proud that Meta's commitment to addressing anti-Semitism on our platforms has remained steadfast, especially after October 7th. Our policies are industry-leading in protecting Jewish people and Israelis on our platforms. Our community standards include policies that prevent harassment, violence, and incitement, and include a robust framework to combat anti-Semitism. Our hateful conduct policy includes specific protections for Israelis and Jews. We banned Holocaust denial and distortion back in 2020. We changed industry thinking on this issue, designating denial as hate speech rather than misinformation. It wasn't just about facts, it was about protecting people from harmful conduct. We banned content with harmful stereotypes about Jews, such as the claim that Jews run the world or other major institutions. We updated our policies to recognize that the term Zionist can be used as a proxy for Jews and Israelis. We banned content claiming Zionists run the world or control the media, and we do not allow for dehumanizing comparisons of Zionists. It's a delicate balance between safety and expression. My role is to ensure that the voices of Israelis and the Jewish community are heard in this policy-making process.
Why in that camera for?
Chances are you've seen him.
Try
to the restaurant.
Sympathized with his wheelchair, his drawn hands, his story ripped at your heart.
Them give me money and to get some eat.
Lexington police say he's taken his act on tour of the city to places like the Lansdowne Shops, Hamburg, and the Zandale corridor of Nicholasville Road. We busted this bogus beggar right outside the police department, just minutes after a press conference about it.
I appreciate you guys busting me. Yeah, I'm really good at it, really good. I clear about $100,000 a year doing this.
$100,000 a year?
Yeah, about 60 to 100. My bead boy, I'm just playing. I gotta go, y'all. I gotta make some money.
He was back at it again.
Okay, I don't know how long this video is going to stay up. I might delete it later, but I used to work at Plum Island, Lab 257. Yep, that Lab 257. They told us it was animal research, just livestock stuff. Studying diseases to protect the food supply. That's how they always frame it, make it sound like we're doing something good. But the things I saw in that lab, the experiments, it wasn't about animals. It wasn't ever just about animals. First red flag, most of the people I work with either didn't ask questions or knew not to. Those who did ask too much, let's just say they didn't stay around for too long. Contracts pulled, cleared out like they never existed. We get shipments in the middle of the night, no labels, no records. I'm talking live animals, sometimes already mutated. Sometimes they weren't even species that we have names for. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've seen things that look like they weren't even from this planet. Hybrid creatures like something out of a movie. We weren't just testing viruses, we were engineering them. Modifying bacteria, adding genetic sequences that shouldn't even be compatible with human DNA. At one point, I was assigned to a project that involved ticks. Yep. Those ticks. We were told it was a control study to understand how disease spreads, but what we really were doing was testing how to make the virus spread easier, more contagious, more invisible. A few months later, the first Lyme disease cases popped up across the water in Connecticut just out of nowhere. Coincidence? Sure. Then there were the containment breaches. We weren't allowed to say the word leak. If something got out, we call it a displacement. You see a mutated deer foaming at the mouth on the shoreline, that's a displacement. You see some wild creature, unalive, looking like it got stitched together from 4 different animals, displacement. They always had an explanation, always just enough to keep you paranoid but not empowered. That's how they keep you quiet. I shouldn't be saying any of this. I've already seen 2 people disappear after talking too much. Plum Island wasn't just some animal lab, it was a test site, a lab rat farm.
Hello. So I came across this old Bible. This is from 1884, and she's in pretty bad shape, but I started reading it, and there is something that I want to show you. So this has a lot of amazing things in it. So we're going to go over here, and I'll show you some of I took some screenshots of all of this stuff. Chronological chart of religions of the world, and one thing that I just want to show you here real quick, and I do have pictures of these maps. Ancient faiths before Christianity, and I found something really interesting for those of you who have ever heard of the mounds. So I came across, okay, here it is. This is where it starts. The fact that the American continent seems to have been unknown to the writers of the Hebrew scriptures, as well as to all other writers of sacred books in the old world, is food for reflection. The evidences of the antiquity of mankind on this continent are as numerous and convincing as any found in the Eastern world. The race called the Mound Builders that preceded the American Indians have left abundant proofs of their advance in the arts of civilization. And in these particulars, the various sections of the country furnish very distinct groups of objects showing progress from age to age and independence of each other in language, manufacturers, and controls. In the plastic arts, the mound builders of America were far in advance of the so-called Stone Age of Europe. And then over here, I thought this was really interesting. It says, it is quite probable probable that the so-called savages of which we have accounts in the various nations of antiquity were the remnants of older people who had degenerated and lost their knowledge of better things and become wanderers or dwellers in the woods with the wild animals. And if you know anything about the mound builders, you know what I'm talking about. And this is in an 1884 Bible. And there's a bunch of other things in this Bible that I'm going to get to and show you. Just, some amazing things. I'll show you a little bit. But it shows, there's lots of pictures, some beautiful pictures. And there's things about coins, the calendar. There's just all kinds of interesting things.
Where does this fucking water come from? It's just unlimited water, comes down forever, and then you might say, oh, it comes from like a lake or an ocean. What, there's an ocean on top of the fucking mountain?
This doesn't make any sense. So this water is constantly flowing downstream, coming from this water source. Where does this water come from?
Ah, there's water. Yay. There is water. So I wonder where is this water coming from, but at least we've got water. From a tree.
Que no han tenido el privilegio de ver cómo nace un río, así nace. De la roca, de la piedra, de la montaña.
Oh, life is bigger. It's bigger than you, and you are not me. The links that I will go to, the distance in your eyes. Oh no, I've said too much. I set it up. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try.
Well, me and Mr. Hesh, the corporation counsel, were on the 23rd floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
In 2001, Barry Jennings was the Deputy Director of Emergency Services for the New York City Housing Authority. After the first plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. on the morning of 9/11, Jennings was called to the city's Office of Emergency Management in World Trade Center Building 7, along with Corporation Counsel Michael Hess, to help coordinate the emergency response. Hours later, World Trade Center Building 7, also known as the Salomon Brothers Building, collapsed at free-fall acceleration directly into the path of most resistance. After 7 years of investigation, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, determined that the building had not come down due to explosives or controlled demolition, as many alleged, or due to structural damage from the collapse of the Twin Towers. an explosion in the building's fuel oil systems, or any of the other suggestions that had been put forward and retracted by NIST over the course of its investigation. In September 2008, just as NIST was presenting its final report concluding that WTC-7 had spontaneously collapsed from ordinary office fires, it was reported that Barry Jennings had passed away in hospital the month before. No further details of his death were offered. Dylan Avery, seeking to bring closure to Barry Jennings' life, answer questions about his death, and honor the bravery of a 9/11 survivor who spoke the truth even when it was unpopular, hired a private investigator to determine the circumstances of Jennings' death. In a remarkable and bizarre turn of events, however, after pursuing the case, the investigator referred the matter to the police, refunded his fee, and told Avery never to contact him again. To this day, no time or cause of death of Barry Jennings has ever been publicly announced or confirmed.
The man stepped over bodies. We know that happened. He and Hess both talked about internal explosions. That building housed the CIA, the Secret Service, the SEC.
I'm just confused about one thing, and one thing only. Why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place. I'm very confused about that. I know what I heard. I heard explosions.
Panthers were on the rise in the United States of America. And they seem to be doing good things. They seem to be able to feed their communities. They seem to be able to house them. They seem to be able to look after them. So we thought, why not start up a Brisbane chapter here? And we did.
Everyone has a right to defend themselves against an aggressive enemy. And it is inhuman. It's denying a person's human rights if you give a gun to one man and don't give it to another one.
Young activists took a revived Aboriginal dignity in directions that surprised even themselves.
And I believe everyone should be allowed to have guns.
That's what land rights means. That means a lot of money, and it means a lot of people that are getting rich off your blood and guts.
We accused all sorts of wide and wonderful things. We were accused of gun running into Yukon, which is total crap. The Black Panthers, I think, was a statement of frustration about what wasn't being done here and what needed to be done here, and that Black Panther movement really expounded the necessity for survival programs for us to at least survive the genocidal war.